Hi guys, welcome to Wednesday, April 1st. Today's instruction video will include a PowerPoint talking about Chapter 1, so make sure you've read this before you go through this video. So if you haven't yet, stop this video, go back and read the chapter. I have posted the chapter on Google Classroom under Materials for those of you who didn't know we needed a textbook or couldn't get to the school in time. Please feel free to email the office though if you do find that you don't like my copies because they are kind of hard to read sometimes. Please email the school. I think they'll allow you if you email say, hey, I really need to stop by the LMC and I need to pick up this textbook. When can I do this? The textbooks are available in the LMC. Try to contact the school office. I know that they are available during the school days from around 7 to 3 like usual. So please feel free to contact them. Like I said, I will post the chapters though via scans on a PowerPoint as I did on the first chapter, which is already available in Google Classroom. And to make it easier, those pictures easier to read because they're only like half the screen, you can hit present and then that will make the image bigger for you and easier to read. All right. So continuing forward, let's go through this chapter 1 of looking in and looking out. Again, please read the chapter before we go through this so you have a deeper understanding of what we're talking about. And let's get into this. Okay. So looking in, looking out. So this is a first look at interpersonal communication and what that really means and what this class therefore really means. So why we communicate for pretty much 3 different reasons, but also practical goals. But the 3 main needs, the physical needs, the identity needs, and the social needs. The physical needs being, a lot of research has been put into it, the fact that physically, when we communicate with others and we have that open communication, we live longer, we're healthier human beings physically. So in the book you read how a lot of people who have healthy communication with multiple people, or at least with a couple of good people, end up having lower health risks as they get older. So communication is good for the health, good for your health. Identity needs. So that goes into self-identity and how you identify yourself, whether you identify yourself as smart, funny, pretty even. The way you identify yourself has a lot to do with other people. And while you don't have to identify yourself via what other people think about you, a lot of times you understand yourself better, you self-identify better with how people communicate with you and how they interact with you. So for instance, if when you're telling a joke and every time you tell a joke, a lot of people laugh and it seems genuine that they laugh, you can pretty much assume and take on that identity of being a funny person. And then we get into social needs. So communication is important for social needs because being social is also really good for you. So you need to build relationships, not just friendships and personal relationships, but also work relationships. So being social, the way we communicate is important. And as we'll get into further in the PowerPoint, the way we communicate with one person is definitely different than how we communicate with other people. And then practical goals and instrumental goals. So practical goals, communicating is important. This class is important because communication is something that you need in the workforce, in your personal lives. You're going to need it. You'll see when we do this employability assignment, we'll do it twice, once in the middle of the trimester and once at the end, that communication goals are important in your employability. So that's why when people are filling out resumes, a lot of employers look for the ability to communicate well with others. Because if you don't communicate well with others, you're not going to be able to form relationships that either further the company or further business relations. So practical goals. The process of communication. Okay, so there's 2 models that you read about in the book. The first one is the linear communication model. That one was basic when researchers first started doing communication, and it was set up as a communication is something that a sender does to a receiver, which is really basic and, as read in the book, is set up a lot like how people think of radio communication going or TV communication. So there's a sender, encoding, message, channel, receiver, decoding, and noise. And you'll notice that noise in the book doesn't mean always like noise as we think of it as hearing noise. It's noise as in uh, things that distract you from communicating well, which can include noise, but not always. Okay, so this is the model for the linear type of communication. You'll see that there's a sender and a receiver. It's really basic, and then there's also noise and channels. So this communication, this linear model, is set up kind of like you would think a radio, a TV, the internet is set up. There's someone who sends the message, and then there's someone who receives the message. And the longer the channel, the more noise and distractions there can be. Very basic model, doesn't actually really fit into the process of communication. So this was basic. It was when they were first starting studying it, and they realized that it didn't quite work for when it came to communication because there's so many other situations and types of communication that do not fit into this model. So they created the transactional communication model, with communicators replacing the senders and the receivers, the environments, channels, and internal and external noise. So the transactional model, look at it here, replaces the sender and the receiver because when you're communicating with someone, and you'll notice this in your own communications, you're both at the same time, no matter who's talking and who's listening, you're both receiving messages from each other and communicating messages to each other at the same exact time. So while a friend might say, okay, let's talk about the homework, or a teacher, probably not a friend, a teacher, the student most likely will make a face. So I already know as a teacher that, you guys do not want to talk about the homework from your facial expressions. That is a type of communication. It might be unintentional and it's nonverbal, but it's still a type of communication. And what I say next might be talking about that communication you gave me from your facial expressions, or the dramatic sigh, or whatnot. So, and then of course there's the extra noise. You'll see how these two interlap. So they say in the book that that's when you talk about your environment. Environment being many different things, not just the environment you're in, but the environment that a person A and person B come from. So one might be rich, one might be poor. They might have different religious backgrounds. They might have different cultural backgrounds. There's so many different things that affect the way two people communicate. Their age, their sexuality, so many different environments. And the more you see right here, the more they overlap, the easier it will be to communicate because there's less different types of noise in between. And we'll go into those noise as the book does, but we'll even go more into it, I think, in tomorrow's instructor video, because there's another couple slideshows for each of the different types of noise, just to get a further understanding of those and what distractions can make communication more difficult. So, interpersonal communication versus impersonal communication. Interpersonal, you'll see the really long definition here. A transactional process involving participants who occupy different but overlapping environments and create meaning and relationships through the exchange of messages, many of which are affected by external, physiological, and psychological noise. So no matter how many differences you have, there is always going to be some overlap between who you're talking to. So while your sexuality, your religion, almost everything in your personal life might be different, you might overlap with the fact that you're the same age, or you are both students. There's some overlap which makes interpersonal communication possible. Then there's impersonal communication, the opposite of interpersonal communication. Yeah, that's a really short and simplified version, but a lot of times it goes into, a communication that's impersonal and there's not really any overlap, and also goes into the fact that to have successful communication, especially successful interpersonal communication, there has to be communication on both sides. There can't just be that one person talking. There has to be an interaction of sorts. So features of interpersonal communication: uniqueness, so relational culture, irreplaceability, interdependence, disclosure, and intrinsic rewards. So the uniqueness, the relational culture. So the uniqueness of the relationship between the people, how you relate to each other. Irreplaceability. So the way you communicate with one person is different than the way you communicate with another person, and you cannot communicate with one person the way you communicate with another. Interdependence. So how much you depend on a person in your life and their happiness and how they receive what you're saying to them depends on how you communicate with them. So if you're dependent on this person through their happiness, you're going to communicate with them in a way to keep them happy. Disclosure. How much information about yourself are you disclosing? Or how much about how you're feeling are you disclosing? The chapter goes into disclosure being even really personal relationships, like romantic couples, sometimes don't disclose everything because it almost makes the relationship a little bit happier if there's a little miscommunication. Just a little bit, though. Intrinsic rewards, what you get from the communication. So communication principles and misconceptions. Communication principles. Communication can be intentional or unintentional. So we talked about that. How the fact that intentional, you saying something directly, I want food, that's intentional. Or unintentional, can be not just nonverbal cues such as facial expressions or kind of size, but mostly facial expressions or hand movements or whatever. That's nonverbal communication. But unintentional can also be something that you say verbally, but you don't really intend other parties to hear, like mumbling under your breath or sighing, or even rolling your eyes if you don't think that someone can see you roll your eyes and you do it anyway, but then they see you. That can be unintentional communication on your part. Or if your facial expressions, obviously a lot of times you don't know if you have a poker face or not. That can be unintentional communication. It's impossible not to communicate. So the way the book describes it is the fact that we're kind of transmitters that cannot be turned off. We're always communicating something, even when we're silent. We're communicating something. Just like they said at the beginning of the chapter, silent treatment can affect people in really negative ways, the person who's been given the silent treatment. So just by being silent, you can be communicating with someone that, hey, I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you. I'm mad at you. That's still communication, even when you're silent. And then communication is unrepeatable, meaning that even with the same person in the same environment, because you change every day, every minute, every hour as a person because of the interactions you have or the things you watch or the things you listen to, you can't repeat the same exact conversation and get the same exact reaction. It's impossible. All right, so we're getting to 30 seconds before the 15-minute mark, so I'm going to stop here and then create another video. And so we will get into part 2 next.